Her voice, it's like she's singing my own heart back to me, Ethan Harper whispered to himself, frozen on the bustling cobblestones of the French Quarter, his green eyes locked on a young woman whose melody cut through the chaos. Maya Johnson, a stranger with a voice that stirred his buried past, stood unaware of the tech mogul watching, her song weaving a spell of pain and hope. Her music would unravel a story that shattered walls of prejudice, binding two souls in a love that defied the world's divisions. This tale, the homeless woman sang on the street, no one cared, until her melody made a billionaire cry, will pull you into a journey of resilience and connection, revealing how one voice can change everything. I'd love for you to subscribe and share where you're listening from, city, time, or mood. Stick around. This story's heart will surprise you. The French Quarter of New Orleans pulsed with life as the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the cobblestone streets. The air thrummed with the soulful wail of saxophones, the brassy call of trumpets, and the rhythmic clink of glasses from dimly lit bars. Tourists wove through the crowd, their laughter mingling with the jazz that spilled from open doorways. But in a quiet corner, tucked between a weathered brick wall and a flickering street lamp, a different sound rose. A voice, pure and haunting, cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk. Maya Johnson stood there, barely 20, her figure slight but unyielding against the evening chill. Her deep brown eyes, wide and searching, gleamed under the fading light, and her smooth, chestnut skin glowed with a quiet resilience. Her hair, a cascade of tight curls, framed a face that held both innocence and defiance. She wore a faded denim jacket, its cuffs frayed from years of wear, and a simple cotton dress that fluttered in the breeze. Beside her, on a cracked square of sidewalk, sat her 8-year-old brother, Caleb, his small frame curled around a rusty tin can. His eyes, mirrors of Maya's, flickered with a mix of hope and weariness as he watched the crowd, clutching the can like a lifeline. Maya's voice soared, a soulful blend of folk and jazz, each note trembling with a story she'd never spoken aloud. She sang of loss, of dreams deferred, of a mother's laughter now faded to memory. Her song wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It was raw, unpolished, yet so piercing it seemed to hush the world around her. But the world didn't listen. The crowd flowed past, their faces a blur of indifference. A group of tourists, their cameras slung around their necks, glanced her way, then turned back to their maps. A man in a tailored suit tossed a cigarette butt near her feet, his eyes sliding over her as if she were part of the scenery. "Get a job, beggar," a woman in a floral dress muttered, her voice sharp as she tugged her child away. Another passerby, a young man with a smirk, called out, "Take that noise somewhere else." The words stung, but Maya's voice didn't waver. She sang on, her breath visible in the cool air, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. To Maya, the street was both stage and battlefield. She'd been invisible her whole life, first as an orphan shuffled through foster homes, then as a black girl in a world quick to judge her skin before her soul. Singing was her rebellion, her refusal to let that invisibility swallow her whole. Every note was a plea, not just for the coins that might clink into Caleb's can, but for someone, anyone, to see her. To hear the story she poured into her music, the ache of losing her parents, the weight of raising Caleb alone, the flicker of hope she clung to despite it all. But the French Quarter didn't care. It never had. The coins were few, the glances fewer, and the insults too many. Caleb, cross-legged on the pavement, watched his sister with unwavering faith. His small hands gripped the tin can, its edges dented from months of use. He was too young to fully grasp the cruelty of the world, but old enough to feel its bite. He'd seen the way people looked at Maya, their eyes narrowing as if her voice, her presence, was an intrusion. Yet when she sang, his world felt whole. Her voice was his shelter, his proof that beauty could exist in a place so harsh. He hummed along softly, his high-pitched voice barely audible, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the can. A single quarter landed in it, thrown by a passing teenager who didn't even look back. Caleb's face lit up, but Maya didn't notice. Her eyes were half closed, lost in the music, her body swaying as if the melody could carry her away from this corner, this life. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. The crowd thickened, their voices louder, their steps faster. Maya's song shifted, her voice dropping to a low, mournful hum that seemed to pull at the heartstrings of anyone who might pause to listen. But no one did. A woman in a red coat stopped briefly, her head tilting as if caught by the sound, but her friend tugged her arm and they disappeared into a nearby bar. A street performer juggling nearby shot Maya a glare, as if her singing stole his spotlight. Even the pigeons seemed indifferent, pecking at crumbs just out of Caleb's reach. Maya's throat tightened, not from the strain of singing, but from the weight of being unseen. She'd grown used to it. The sidelong glances, the whispered slurs, the way people crossed the street to avoid her. But tonight the rejection felt heavier, sharper, like a blade pressed against her chest. She glanced at Caleb, his small face glowing with pride, and her resolve hardened. She sang for him, for the promise she'd made to their mother's memory, to keep him safe, to give him a future. The coins in the can wouldn't buy much, maybe a burger to split, a night in a shelter if they were lucky. But her voice was more than currency. It was her defiance, her proof that she existed. As the last notes of her song faded, a gust of wind swept through the street, carrying a crumpled dollar bill past Caleb's can. He scrambled after it, his small hands snatching it from the pavement. "Maya, look!" he called, his voice bright with triumph. She forced a smile, kneeling to ruffle his hair. "Good catch, kiddo," she said, her voice soft but strained. She tucked the bill into the can, her fingers brushing against the few coins inside. The weight of it felt like nothing compared to the weight in her heart. The street lamp above flickered, casting long shadows over the cobblestones. Maya stood, brushing dirt from her dress, and took a deep breath. The crowd moved on, oblivious, their laughter drowning out the echo of her song. She glanced at Caleb, his eyes still shining with hope, and felt a flicker of it spark within her too. She'd sing again tomorrow and the day after that, because giving up wasn't an option. Not for her, not for Caleb. As the night closed in, Maya lifted her voice once more, a new melody rising, fierce and unbroken, into the indifferent heart of the French Quarter. The French Quarter buzzed with its usual chaos as the afternoon sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the streets in hues of amber and rose. The air carried the scent of beignets and the distant clang of streetcar bells. But for Ethan Harper, the world seemed to pause. The 30-year-old tech mogul, his tailored jacket slightly rumpled from a morning of volunteer work, wove through the crowd, a cardboard box of sandwiches tucked under his arm. His sharp features, high cheekbones, piercing green eyes, and a jawline that could cut glass drew fleeting glances from passers-by, but his focus was elsewhere. He was in the quarter to distribute food for his sister Sophia's charity, a ritual that grounded him in a life otherwise adrift in boardrooms and penthouses. Orphaned young, Ethan knew loss, but his wealth had built a wall between him and the raw edges of the world, until a voice broke through. It came from a corner near a weathered jazz club, a melody so pure it seemed to hush the clamor around it. Ethan stopped, his polished shoes scuffing the cobblestones, as the voice wrapped around him like a warm current. It was Maya Johnson, her slight figure silhouetted against the fading light, her denim jacket frayed at the cuffs. Her voice, a soulful weave of folk and jazz, carried a weight that made his chest tighten. Each note trembled with a story, grief, resilience, hope. And Ethan, a man who'd built an empire on logic, felt something stir he couldn't name. Beside her sat Caleb, her young brother, his small hands clutching a tin can, his eyes scanning the crowd for kindness that rarely came. Ethan adjusted the box under his arm and moved closer, his steps slow, almost reverent. Maya's eyes were half closed, her body swaying as she sang, oblivious to the man approaching. Her voice climbed, a haunting crescendo that seemed to pull at the soul, and Ethan felt a pang of recognition. Her music echoed the lullabies his mother used to sing, memories buried under years of corporate armor. He stood a few feet away, the crowd parting around him, their chatter fading as Maya's voice held him captive. A woman bumped into him, muttering an apology, but he barely noticed. His world had narrowed to the girl on the corner, her song a mirror to his own hidden scars. He wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but hesitated. What could he offer without sounding like another privileged do-gooder? He'd seen too many volunteers cross that line, their help tinged with pity that stung more than it healed. Maya's voice faltered for a moment as a group of rowdy tourists laughed nearby, their voices drowning her out. Caleb's shoulders slumped, his small fingers tightening around the can. Ethan's jaw clenched. He knew that look, the weight of being unseen. He'd felt it as a boy, shuffled through foster homes before Sophia, barely 18, fought to keep him close. This girl, this voice, deserved more than the street's indifference. Ethan stepped forward, his polished exterior at odds with the rawness of the scene. Maya's song ended, and she opened her eyes, catching his gaze for a fleeting moment. Her expression hardened, a flicker of defiance in her deep brown eyes. She was used to stares, some curious, some cruel, but none that lingered like his. Ethan cleared his throat, shifting the box of sandwiches. "That was incredible," he said, his voice softer than he intended. Maya's lips pressed into a thin line, her posture stiffening. She didn't respond, turning instead to Caleb, who was shaking the tin can, its meager contents rattling. Ethan felt a flush of embarrassment. Of course, she wouldn't trust him. A stranger, white, wealthy, standing out like a sore thumb in her world. He knelt beside Caleb, offering a sandwich from the box. "Hungry?" he asked, his tone gentle. Caleb's eyes lit up, but he glanced at Maya, waiting for her nod. She gave it, reluctantly, her gaze never leaving Ethan. "We're fine," she said, her voice low but firm, a shield against charity she didn't trust. Ethan nodded, setting the sandwich beside Caleb, who tore into it with the hunger of a child who hadn't eaten all day. Ethan's chest ached. He wanted to do more, to say more, but Maya's guarded expression stopped him. She wasn't just protecting herself, she was protecting Caleb, and Ethan respected that more than he could say. "I'm Ethan," he said, standing, brushing dirt from his knee. "I work with my sister's charity. We help folks like you." The words felt clumsy, wrong, and he winced internally. Maya's eyes narrowed, her arms crossing. "We don't need handouts," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut. Ethan nodded, unfazed. "I get it, but your voice, it's something special. People should hear it." Her expression didn't soften, but a flicker of curiosity passed through her eyes before she looked away, tucking a curl behind her ear. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a card with Sophia's charity logo. A simple dove over the words Hope Haven. "If you ever need anything, food, a place to stay, my sister Sophia runs this. She's a good person." He held out the card, but Maya didn't take it. Caleb, still chewing, reached out instead, his small fingers snatching it with a grin. "Thanks, mister," he said, his voice muffled by bread. Maya shot him a look, but Caleb's smile didn't fade. Ethan stepped back, giving them space. "I'll be around," he said, his eyes lingering on Maya. She didn't respond, turning to adjust Caleb's jacket, but Ethan caught the way her fingers hesitated, clutching the fabric a little too tightly. He walked away, the box lighter under his arm, but his mind heavy with her voice. It followed him through the quarter, weaving into the jazz, the laughter, the clatter of life. He didn't know her story, but he felt it, her pain, her strength, her refusal to break. And he knew, with a certainty that startled him, that he'd come back to that corner tomorrow. As he disappeared into the crowd, Maya glanced at the card in Caleb's hand, her jaw tight. She wanted to toss it, to reject the kindness that felt too much like pity, but Caleb's hopeful eyes stopped her. She tucked the card into her pocket, her fingers brushing the worn fabric, and turned back to the street. The quarter pulsed on, indifferent, but for the first time in a long time, Maya felt a crack in her armor. A stranger had heard her, and that alone was enough to unsettle her heart. Rain fell in relentless sheets over the French Quarter, turning the cobblestone streets into a glistening maze of puddles and reflections. The usual vibrancy of New Orleans was muted, the jazz notes from nearby bars softened by the hiss of water against pavement. Maya Johnson and her little brother Caleb huddled beneath the sagging awning of a shuttered cafe, its faded sign creaking in the wind. Maya's denim jacket was soaked through, clinging to her slender frame, and her curls dripped water onto her shoulders. Caleb pressed close, his small body shivering. The tin can clutched tightly against his chest as if it could shield him from the cold. The street was nearly empty, the tourists and performers scattered by the downpour, leaving the siblings alone in a world that felt too big, too unkind. Maya's eyes scanned the empty sidewalk, her heart heavy with the day's failures. They'd been chased from their usual corner by a shopkeeper who'd called her singing a nuisance, his voice dripping with disdain. The few coins in Caleb's can wouldn't buy them a warm meal, let alone a place to sleep. She pulled Caleb closer, her arm a protective shield, but her mind raced. She was 20 years old, and the weight of raising her brother alone pressed harder with every passing day. Her voice, her only weapon, felt useless against the rain and the world's indifference. She hummed softly, a fragment of a lullaby their mother once sang, trying to soothe Caleb's quiet whimpers. His eyes, wide and trusting, looked up at her, and she forced a smile, even as her throat tightened with despair. A shadow moved through the rain, a figure approaching under the glow of a street lamp. Ethan Harper, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, held a large black umbrella that shielded a paper bag tucked under his arm. His tailored coat was damp, but his green eyes were bright, searching as they landed on Maya and Caleb. He'd been combing the quarter for them, driven by the memory of Maya's voice, which had haunted him since he heard it yesterday. The sandwiches he'd been distributing were gone, but he'd saved one last bag, hoping to find the girl whose song had cracked something open inside him. Now, seeing them huddled and soaked, his chest tightened with an urgency he hadn't felt in years. "Hey," Ethan called softly, stopping a few feet away, careful not to startle them. Maya's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. She recognized him, the man from yesterday, the one with the charity card and the two kind words. Her grip on Caleb tightened, her body tensing as if bracing for a blow. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice sharp, cutting through the rain. Ethan raised a hand, palm open, a gesture of peace. "I saw you out here. Thought you might need this." He held out the bag, its contents warm enough to send a faint steam curling into the cold air. Caleb's eyes widened, his stomach growling audibly, but Maya didn't move. "We don't need your pity," she said, her words a wall, her pride a shield. Ethan nodded unfazed and crouched to Caleb's level, keeping the umbrella over them. "It's just a sandwich," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "No strings." Caleb glanced at Maya, his hunger battling her caution. Her jaw clenched, but she gave a small nod, and Caleb reached for the bag, his small fingers trembling as he pulled out a wrapped sandwich. "Thank you," he mumbled, tearing into it with a ferocity that made Ethan's heart ache. Maya watched, her expression unreadable, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of gratitude she couldn't voice. Ethan stood, brushing water from his coat. "I meant what I said yesterday," he continued, his tone careful. "Your voice, it's something else. I've never heard anything like it." Maya's lips parted, but no words came. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not from someone like him. White, wealthy, a world apart. She turned away, focusing on Caleb, who was devouring the sandwich, crumbs clinging to his chin. Ethan pressed on, undeterred. "I know what it's like to feel alone," he said, his voice quieter now, almost lost in the rain. "My parents died when I was a kid. My sister raised me. We didn't have much, but we had each other. I see that in you and him." Maya's head turned slightly, her eyes meeting his for a moment. His words struck a chord, but years of betrayal, by foster systems, by strangers, by a society quick to judge her skin, kept her guarded. "You don't know us," she said, her voice low, almost a challenge. Ethan nodded, accepting the rebuke. "You're right, I don't, but I'd like to." He reached into his pocket, pulling out another card for Sophia's charity, Hope Haven. "My sister runs this place. It's safe. Food, shelter, no judgment. If you need it, she's there." He held out the card, rain dripping from his fingers. Maya stared at it, her heart a battlefield of need and pride. She wanted to refuse, to tell him to leave them alone, but Caleb's shivering form stopped her. She took the card, her fingers brushing against his for a fleeting second, sending a jolt through her she didn't understand. "Thanks," she muttered, barely audible, tucking the card into her jacket. Ethan smiled, small but genuine, and stepped back. "Stay dry," he said, his eyes lingering on her a moment longer before he turned into the rain, his umbrella bobbing through the empty street. Maya watched him go, the card burning a hole in her pocket. She didn't trust him. Not yet. Too many people had offered help only to demand something in return. But his eyes, the way they held hers without pity, unsettled her. Caleb finished the sandwich, licking his fingers, and looked up at her. "He's nice," he said, his voice hopeful. Maya didn't answer, her gaze fixed on the rain where Ethan had vanished. She pulled Caleb close, her hum starting again, soft and steady, a shield against the world. But deep down a crack had formed in her defenses. A stranger had seen her, and that alone was enough to make her heart tremble. The rain had stopped, but the French Quarter streets still shimmered under the soft glow of street lamps, the air heavy with the scent of wet stone and magnolia blossoms. Maya Johnson stood outside the modest brick building of Hope Haven, Sophia Harper's charity, her hand gripping Caleb's tightly. Her denim jacket, still damp from last night's storm, hung heavy on her shoulders, and her curls were pulled back in a hurried knot. Caleb, clutching the empty tin can, looked up at the building with wide, curious eyes, his small frame bouncing with a mix of excitement and nerves. Maya's heart pounded, not from the walk, but from the weight of stepping into a place that promised help. Help she'd learned to distrust. She'd come for Caleb, for a warm bed, a chance to keep him safe, but every fiber of her screamed to turn back. The card Ethan had given her, now creased and soft from her anxious fingers, was her only reason to stay. Inside, the charity's lobby was warm, smelling faintly of coffee and fresh paint. Volunteers bustled about, stacking blankets and sorting food donations. Maya hesitated at the threshold, her eyes scanning for judgment in every glance. A woman at the front desk, her hair pulled into a tight bun, looked up and smiled thinly. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but clipped. Maya straightened, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "I'm here to see Sophia Harper, about shelter." The woman's eyes flicked over Maya's worn clothes, then to Caleb, who clung to her side. She nodded, gesturing to a clipboard. "Sign in. I'll let her know." As Maya scribbled her name, she caught the woman whispering to a colleague, her voice low but cutting. "Another one looking for a handout. They always do." Maya's hand froze, the pen trembling. The words sliced through her, familiar yet sharp, rekindling the shame she'd fought to bury. She wanted to snap back, to demand respect, but Caleb's small hand squeezed hers, grounding her. She signed the form and stepped back, her jaw tight. Sophia Harper appeared moments later, her presence warm and commanding. She was in her mid-30s with Ethan's green eyes but softer features, her auburn hair tied loosely. "Maya, right?" she said, her smile genuine, reaching out a hand. Maya nodded, shaking it briefly, her guard still up. Sophia knelt to Caleb's level. "And you must be Caleb. Got a favorite song?" Caleb grinned, shy but charmed. "Maya sings better than anyone," he said proudly. Sophia's eyes lit up. "Is that so? I'd love to hear her sometime." Maya shifted uncomfortably, unused to attention that didn't feel like scrutiny. Sophia led them to a small office, offering juice for Caleb and a chair for Maya. She explained the shelter's services, beds, meals, job programs. But Maya's mind drifted, the whispered words from the desk echoing. She wanted to leave, to prove she didn't need this place, but Caleb's hopeful gaze kept her rooted. As they waited for paperwork, Caleb tugged at her sleeve, humming one of her songs. Without thinking, Maya joined in, her voice soft but clear, filling the small room with a melody that felt like a confession, raw, aching, yet defiant. Sophia stopped mid-sentence, her pen still, her eyes locked on Maya. When the song ended, she leaned forward. "That was beautiful," she said, her voice hushed. "We're hosting a charity gala next week. Would you sing for us? Your voice could inspire people to give." Maya froze, her instinct to refuse battling the spark of possibility. A stage, a real audience. It was a dream she'd buried long ago. But the memory of the desk woman's whisper made her hesitate. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sophia pressed gently. "Think about it. It could mean a lot. For you, for Caleb, for others." Maya nodded, more to end the conversation than to agree. But Caleb's excited, "You gotta do it, Maya," tipped the scale. She agreed, her heart racing with equal parts fear and hope. The night of the gala arrived, and Maya stood backstage at a grand hall in the quarter, her borrowed dress, a simple navy gown, feeling foreign against her skin. Caleb, dressed in a crisp shirt Sophia had found, sat in the front row, his eyes shining. The room buzzed with New Orleans elite, their jewelry glinting under chandeliers, their murmurs tinged with curiosity about the street singer on the program. Maya's hands trembled as she gripped the microphone, her breath shallow. She'd sung for crowds before, but never like this, never with so much to prove. The lights dimmed and she stepped forward, her voice rising in a song she'd written years ago, a blend of folk and jazz that told of her mother's love, her own loss, and the fire that kept her going. Each note was a piece of her soul, laid bare for a room of strangers. The audience fell silent, their skepticism melting into awe. Her voice, unpolished but powerful, filled the hall, weaving a spell that held them captive. In the back, Ethan Harper stood, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the worn jacket he'd worn in the rain. He'd come to support Sophia's event, but Maya's voice hit him like a wave. It wasn't just her talent, it was the pain, the strength, the echo of his own mother's lullabies from a childhood long gone. His throat tightened, and a tear slipped down his cheek, unnoticed in the shadows. He saw himself in her, a kid who'd lost everything, fighting to be seen. But where he'd found wealth, she'd found music, and it bound them in a way he couldn't explain. Maya finished, the last note lingering, and the room erupted in applause. She blinked, stunned, as Caleb whooped from the front. But as she stepped off stage, she caught a woman's murmured comment. "Talented, sure, but she's still just a charity case." The words stung, rebuilding the walls Maya had let slip. She glanced at Ethan, his eyes still glistening, and felt a jolt. His gaze held something deeper than pity, something she didn't dare name. She turned away, her heart a tangle of hope and fear, unsure if this moment was a door opening or another trap waiting to close. The French Quarter was alive with its usual evening hum, but inside a small recording studio tucked down a narrow alley, the world felt hushed, intimate, almost sacred. The studio's walls, lined with foam panels and strewn with cables, absorbed the distant sounds of jazz and laughter, leaving only the faint hum of equipment. Maya Johnson stood in the recording booth, her reflection faint in the glass that separated her from the control room. Her borrowed navy dress from the gala had been replaced with her familiar denim jacket and cotton skirt, but her presence carried the same quiet power. Caleb sat cross-legged on a worn couch outside the booth, his tin can replaced by a juice box from Sophia's charity, his eyes wide with awe at the blinking lights and microphones. Maya's heart raced, not from the equipment, but from the weight of this moment, a chance to capture her voice, a gift from Ethan Harper's charity that felt both generous and perilous. Ethan stood at the mixing board, his sleeves rolled up, his green eyes focused as he adjusted sliders. He'd arranged this session through Sophia's connections, framing it as a thank you for Maya's gala performance, which had raised thousands for Hope Haven. But the truth ran deeper. Her voice haunted him, stirring memories of his mother's songs and a longing he couldn't name. He glanced at Maya through the glass, her posture tense, her hands clasped tightly. She was a mystery, fierce, guarded, yet vulnerable in ways that made his chest ache. He wanted to help her, not out of pity, but out of a connection he felt but couldn't articulate. "Maya, whenever you're ready," Ethan said into the intercom, his voice steady but warm. She nodded, her deep brown eyes flicking to Caleb, who gave her a thumbs up. She took a breath, her fingers brushing the microphone stand, and began to sing. The song was her own, written in stolen moments on the street, a raw ballad about her and Caleb's life, orphaned, adrift, bound by love. Her voice poured out, unpolished but searing, each note carrying the weight of loss and the fire of survival. The lyrics spoke of cold nights, empty promises, and the unyielding hope she held for her brother. In the control room, Ethan froze, his hand hovering over the board, her words cutting through his carefully built walls. Caleb swayed slightly, mouthing the words he knew by heart, his small face glowing with pride. As Maya sang, Ethan leaned closer to the glass, his breath catching. Her voice wasn't just beautiful, it was a story, a mirror to his own childhood grief. The years he'd spent feeling invisible before Sophia pulled him through. He wanted to tell her, to share that piece of himself, but the words felt too heavy, too raw. Instead, he adjusted a knob, his fingers trembling slightly, and spoke into the intercom when she paused. "That was incredible, Maya. Can we try one more take? Maybe lean into that last verse a bit more." She nodded, her expression unreadable, but her eyes held a flicker of trust, a crack in her armor. Between takes, Ethan stepped into the booth to adjust the microphone, his movements careful. "You're a natural," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "This song, it's like you're telling my story too." Maya's eyes met his, searching, and for a moment the air between them crackled. "You don't know my story," she said, but her tone was softer, less guarded than before. Ethan smiled faintly. "I'd like to. I lost my parents young too. Sophia raised me, kept me from falling apart. I see that in you, with Caleb." Maya's lips parted, but before she could respond, their hands brushed as he adjusted the mic stand. The touch was fleeting, electric, and both froze, their eyes locking. Maya's cheeks warmed, and Ethan stepped back, clearing his throat, his heart pounding. The moment was shattered when a studio technician, a wiry man with a smirk, leaned into the booth. "Well, ain't this a picture?" he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Street singer and a CEO? Sounds like a bad rom-com." Maya's face fell, her body stiffening as if slapped. The technician chuckled, oblivious to the hurt in her eyes, and walked out. Maya's hands clenched, her breath shallow. The words cut deeper than the street's insults, reigniting her fear that she was nothing more than a charity case to Ethan, a project to soothe his conscience. "I'm done," she said, her voice cold, ripping off the headphones. She grabbed her jacket, avoiding Ethan's gaze, and headed for the door, calling to Caleb, "Let's go." "Maya, wait," Ethan said, his voice urgent as he followed her into the control room. "That guy's an idiot. Don't listen to him." She spun to face him, her eyes blazing. "Don't. I'm not your pity project, okay? I don't need this." Her voice cracked, betraying the hurt beneath her anger. Caleb, confused, clutched his juice box, looking between them. Ethan's jaw tightened, anger at the technician mixing with frustration at his own helplessness. "This isn't pity," he said, his voice low but fierce. "Your voice, your story, it's real. It matters. To me." Maya hesitated, her breath hitching, caught off guard by the intensity in his eyes. But the technician's words echoed, feeding her doubts. She shook her head, grabbed Caleb's hand, and stormed out into the humid night. Ethan stood frozen, the studio's silence deafening. He wanted to chase her, to make her see he meant every word, but he knew pushing would only drive her further away. Maya's song played on a loop in his mind, her voice a tether he couldn't let go. Outside, Maya pulled Caleb close, her heart a storm of anger and something else. Something warm and terrifying she didn't want to name. The quarter's lights blurred through her unshed tears, but she kept walking, her brother's hand in hers, her voice silent but burning with a melody only she could hear. The French Quarter shimmered under a crescent moon, its streets alive with the clink of glasses and the distant wail of a trumpet. Maya Johnson stood at her old corner, the familiar cobblestones under her worn sneakers, her voice rising once more into the humid night. Her denim jacket hung loose, her curls catching the glow of a street lamp as she sang a slow, soulful melody about resilience, each note a defiance against the world's indifference. Caleb sat nearby, his tin can between his knees, his small face bright with hope despite the sparse coins inside. The crowd flowed past, their glances fleeting, but Maya sang on, her voice a lifeline for both of them. The sting of the studio incident still lingered, the technician's cruel words, the humiliation that made her feel small. But she pushed it down, letting her music carry her above the pain. Ethan Harper watched from across the street, half hidden in the shadow of a jazz club's awning. His tailored shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his hands shoved in his pockets, his green eyes fixed on Maya. Her voice, as haunting as the first time he'd heard it, pulled at him, a reminder of why he couldn't stay away. He'd spent days wrestling with guilt over the studio, replaying her hurt expression, her sharp words. I'm not your pity project. He wasn't here to pity her. He was here because her music, her strength, had cracked open something in him he thought he'd buried long ago. Tonight, he'd come to make things right, to offer her a chance that could change her life, if she'd let him. He crossed the street, his steps deliberate, the crowd parting around him. Maya's song faltered as she spotted him, her eyes narrowing, her posture stiffening. Caleb looked up, his face lighting up with recognition. "It's the sandwich guy," he called, earning a sharp glance from Maya. Ethan stopped a few feet away, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I'm sorry about the studio," he said, his voice steady but earnest, cutting through the hum of the quarter. "That guy was out of line. I should have shut him down sooner." Maya's lips pressed into a thin line, her arms crossing. "Why are you here?" she asked, her tone guarded, her eyes searching his face for motives she didn't trust. Ethan took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "There's a music festival in a couple of weeks, the Crescent City Sounds Fest. It's big, Maya. Thousands of people, real stages, real opportunities. I want you to perform. Your voice deserves it." He paused, meeting her gaze. "Caleb deserves it." Her eyes flickered to her brother, who was watching with wide, hopeful eyes, and something in her softened, just a fraction. "Why me?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost a challenge. Ethan's expression softened. "Because when you sing, people feel it. I felt it. You're not just a voice, you're a story, and it's one worth telling." Maya hesitated, her heart a tangle of doubt and longing. The festival was a dream, a chance to give Caleb a future beyond the street. But trusting Ethan meant risking another wound. She glanced at Caleb, who was practically bouncing with excitement, and sighed. "Fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But this is for him, not you." Ethan nodded, a small smile breaking through. "Fair enough. Let's make it happen." The next week was a blur of rehearsals in a borrowed community center, its chipped walls and creaky piano a far cry from the studio's polish. Ethan, to Maya's surprise, showed up to every session, his fingers coaxing soulful chords from the old piano to accompany her voice. They worked through her original songs, refining melodies, finding a rhythm that felt like a conversation. Maya's guard began to crack, her laughter slipping out when Ethan fumbled a note, her eyes lingering when he spoke passionately about music's power to heal. One evening, as the sun set and the room glowed orange, Ethan played a soft riff, his eyes meeting hers. "You make this piano sound better than it has any right to," he said, his voice low, teasing. Maya smirked, her first real smile around him. "Don't get used to it," she shot back. But her tone was lighter, warmer. Their shared moments grew quieter, more intimate, as they shaped her performance. Ethan shared stories of his childhood, of Sophia teaching him to play piano in a cramped apartment, of the loneliness wealth couldn't fill. Maya, hesitant at first, spoke of her mother's lullabies, of nights on the street when Caleb's smile was her only light. Each confession built a bridge between them, fragile but real. One night, under a sky streaked with stars, they stepped outside the center, the air thick with jasmine. Ethan paused, his voice barely audible. "I fell for your voice that first day, Maya. But now, it's you, all of you." His words hung between them, raw and unguarded. Maya's breath caught, her heart racing with fear and something else, something that felt like falling. She wanted to speak, to let herself feel, but the weight of their different worlds held her back. "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered, her voice trembling, but her eyes betrayed a longing she couldn't hide. She turned away, her curls catching the moonlight, and walked back inside, leaving Ethan standing in the quiet. He watched her go, his heart pounding, knowing he'd crossed a line but unable to regret it. Maya, alone in the rehearsal room, pressed her hands to the piano, her fingers tracing the keys Ethan had played. Her song started again, soft and unsteady, a melody of hope and fear woven together, echoing in the empty space where their hearts had begun to harmonize. The Crescent City Sounds Fest transformed the French Quarter into a kaleidoscope of light and sound, its grand stage erected in a sprawling plaza under a sky ablaze with stars. The air buzzed with anticipation, thick with the scent of crawfish boils and the hum of thousands gathered to hear New Orleans' finest musicians. Maya Johnson stood backstage, her hands trembling around the microphone, her borrowed emerald dress catching the glow of the stage lights. The fabric felt foreign, its elegance a stark contrast to her usual denim and cotton, but it hugged her frame with a quiet grace that made her feel both exposed and powerful. Caleb, dressed in a crisp button-up, fidgeted beside her, his eyes wide with excitement. "You're gonna be amazing, Maya," he whispered, his small hand squeezing hers. She forced a smile, her heart pounding, not just from the crowd, but from the weight of what this moment could mean, a chance to rewrite their future. The audience was a sea of faces, a mix of locals in vibrant prints and elites in tailored suits, their chatter tinged with curiosity about the unknown singer who'd closed the gala weeks ago. Maya's breath hitched as she caught whispers from the front rows, some skeptical, others dismissive. "The street girl? Really?" Her fingers tightened around the mic, the familiar sting of judgment threatening to unravel her. But then she saw Ethan Harper in the front row, his green eyes steady, his presence a quiet anchor. Beside him sat Sophia, her warm smile a reminder of the trust they'd built. Maya took a deep breath, her voice ready to reclaim the narrative. The MC's voice boomed, introducing her, and the crowd quieted as she stepped onto the stage. The spotlight hit her, warm and unrelenting, and for a moment, the world felt too vast, too unforgiving. But Caleb's grin from the wings grounded her, and she began to sing. Her song, an original woven with threads of her mother's lullaby and her own story, poured out, a tapestry of loss, love, and unyielding hope. The melody, a soulful blend of folk and jazz, rose and fell like a heartbeat, each note carrying the weight of nights on the street, of Caleb's laughter, of her refusal to break. The lyrics spoke of a girl who'd been invisible, a brother who'd been her light, and a dream that refused to die. Her voice, raw and powerful, filled the plaza, silencing the crowd's murmurs, pulling them into her world. Ethan leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly, his breath catching as Maya's voice wove through the melody his mother once sang. The notes stirred memories of childhood nights, of loss he'd buried under wealth and ambition. Her song wasn't just music, it was a mirror, reflecting his own search for meaning. A tear slipped down his cheek, unashamed, as he watched her command the stage, her strength a beacon in the night. The crowd, once skeptical, was spellbound, their faces softening, some swaying, others wiping their own tears. Maya's voice reached into their hearts, bridging the gap between her world and theirs, proving she was more than a street girl. She was a force. As the final note lingered, the plaza erupted in applause, a thunderous wave that shook Maya to her core. She blinked, stunned, her chest heaving as she absorbed the sound. Caleb whooped from the wings, his small fist pumping the air, and Sophia clapped fiercely, her pride radiant. Maya's eyes found Ethan's, and his gaze, raw, unwavering, held a depth that made her heart stutter. She stepped off stage, her legs shaky, and Caleb threw his arms around her, babbling about how she sounded like a superstar. Before she could respond, Ethan was there, his presence steady amidst the chaos. Without a word, he took her hand, his touch warm and deliberate, and led her back toward the stage's edge, facing the crowd. The gesture was bold, public, a defiance of the whispers and stares that had followed them. A few onlookers raised eyebrows, their murmurs sharp, but Ethan didn't flinch, his grip firm, his eyes locked on hers. "Maya," he said, his voice low but clear, cutting through the fading applause. "You're incredible. Not just your voice, you. I want you and Caleb to come stay with me and Sophia, not as charity, but as family. I want to help you chase this dream. For you. For him." His words were a vow, unguarded, and Maya's breath caught, her walls crumbling under the weight of his sincerity. The crowd's eyes were on them, but for the first time she didn't care. She saw Caleb's hopeful grin, felt Ethan's hand in hers, and something inside her shifted, a spark of trust, of possibility she'd long denied herself. The scene faded to months later, a larger stage in a packed auditorium, the lights brighter, the crowd louder. Maya stood center stage, her voice soaring, her emerald dress replaced with one she'd chosen herself, a symbol of her new beginning. In the front row, Caleb bounced in his seat, his face alight with pride, while Ethan sat beside him, his eyes glistening with love and awe. Sophia nearby clapped along, her smile a testament to the family they'd become. Maya's song, now polished but no less raw, told of a journey from invisibility to triumph, of a love that had defied the world's divisions. As the final note rang out, the crowd roared, but Maya's gaze was on Ethan and Caleb, their faces her true applause. Her voice had carried her from the streets to this moment, and their love had given her the courage to soar. The story of Maya Johnson and Ethan Harper in The Homeless Woman sang on the street no one cared. Until Her Melody Made a Billionaire Cry is more than a tale of music and love. It's a testament to the power of resilience, connection, and the courage to rise above prejudice. Maya's voice, born from hardship, became a bridge that united two hearts from different worlds, proving that empathy and understanding can heal even the deepest wounds. This journey inspires us to look beyond appearances, to listen to the stories hidden in those society overlooks, and to find hope in the face of adversity. What did Maya and Ethan's story stir in you? How does it challenge you to see the world differently? I'd love for you to share your thoughts, to let their melody spark your own reflections. Thank you for joining me in this heartfelt tale. Until we meet again, keep listening for the songs that change lives.